My name is David Arieti, okay? And I will begin by showing you our events of the day here. Let me get this going. And we have a lot of information. Okay. This is a lecture. However, what I want to do, though, is give you an outline of today's lecture. And we're talking about the Ebola virus. I actually gave this lecture 2 weeks ago at the other campus, but this one is going to be better because I've added more information and we shouldn't have any glitches whatsoever. We have some glitches there, but anyway, I've got to take off my coat. It's a little hot in here. And now, so this is today's lecture, the terror of Ebola. We're going to get the facts. We're going to tell you what it is, why it's happening, and all these other issues. However, I want to begin with something. I want to show you two things. Something very interesting happened a year ago and 13 days. That was October 31st of 2013. And it's funny how things happen. And I want to play this for you. We did the Oakton Follies, okay? And I was in it. And I want to begin by just this one little story I told, okay? And that's very relative to today. Sometimes people are out of touch. I had a friend, I got many friends, you know, the same way he said. He was telling me he had a sister who was in a convent. And he was telling me about one of the stories in the convent where he had a bunch of nuns. Anyway, it was a story. Anyway, so what happened was the mother superior comes into the room and he says, "Hey, fellow nun, we found a case of Ebola with Sister Nancy." Well, Sister Martha gets up and says, "True, that's a relief. It gets 3 times that we're home." Okay. So, you get it? So, what she thought was, if you want to get one of the lights, yeah. Yeah, just turn on one light, now I'm back. Well, I guess we don't need the light. Never mind. Okay, so what she thought was that we had Ebola wine, see? It sounded like Ebola. Hey, thanks for coming. Anyway, so here I have a bottle of Ebola wine. She thought it was Ebola. Just thought I'd start off with that because that's what happened. What's that?
Where are the glasses?
The wine. The which?
Glasses for the wine.
Oh, good point. Yes, well, we got some cups here. All right, anyway, so I'd start with this. Now, what I want to do is to show you the outline of today's thrilling adventure here in Ebola land, to say something short. Now, this is going to last quite a while because I'm a real hellraiser. For those of you in my classes, I tell it the way it is. So, anyway, this is the lecture outline, and we're covering a lot of material. I'm going to tell you what it is, how it comes about, what are the treatments, and all these other issues associated with it. Now, as I mentioned, I gave this lecture 2 weeks ago. Since the last 2 weeks, a lot has happened. Things are just moving along with this crisis we have, or we hope doesn't develop into one. But this is the outline. If something intriguing occurred, this is what I just showed you about the Ebola stand-up I did. We're going to show you books about Ebola and viruses. I'm going to play a 15-minute segment about the Ebola virus that I actually recorded in February 23rd, 1995. And I've been showing it to my classes. I teach biology here at Oakton. I'm mainly at the Skokie campus. I've been using this same show that I recorded for the last 20 years. So I think it's coincidental. I recorded it. I figured this might be worth something in the future, you know, and sure enough, every single year, all my students are learning about Ebola from the last 20 years. And I want to point out, Ebola was just discovered in 1976. So it's a relatively new virus that hasn't been around. It's been around for roughly 50 years that we knew about, okay? Anyway, I'm going to show you all these, and this has a lot. Every one of these topics have some information. I'm going to show you man at the airport. This was a picture I just found this week. We're going to discuss viruses in the body, emerging diseases. What is Ebola? What is a virus? What are viruses compared with to bacterial cells? We're going to talk about the strains of Ebola. We're going to show African countries with Ebola and why they have it. We're going to show you a death chart. That's a nice optimistic thing there. How do you get the virus? Treatment for Ebola, bats and bushmeat, doctors and healthcare workers on the front lines, doctors in Liberia and the United States, how to examine Ebola and biosafety levels. These are real big issues. How to avoid exposure. Why did we wait so long to develop drugs? And I'm a real hellraiser about that. I think I just tell it the way it is. Drug companies evolved in Ebola medicines. And then we're going to hear two about 5-minute audio editorials by Mike Malloy and Amy Goodman from Democracy Now! We're going to talk about solutions to prevent mass outbreaks, and we're going to discuss other viruses such as Marburg, which also raises fear in the viral community. Anyway, what I want to do now is begin with the two books dealing with viruses. And let me just get this up. Okay, I want to show you them. There are these two books, both by Richard Preston, The Hot Zone and Demon in the Freezer, okay? Demon in the Freezer is about smallpox, okay? It's a very good book. As far as I'm concerned, Richard Preston is the John Steinbeck of this century, okay? Once you read his books, the way he poses the words, it's really amazing, okay? So this one, again, Demon in the Freezer, is about smallpox. And why is it called Demon in the Freezer? Because as far as we know, smallpox has been eradicated from the world, except we have two known storage facilities of the Ebola virus. One is in the CDC in Atlanta. The other is a place called Rappaport in the Soviet Union. And the reason why they keep these viruses is to do research on them. So as far as we know, smallpox is totally eradicated, we hope. Of course, the virus is still lying around in the freezers in these two places. Okay, anyway, then we have the other book, The Hot Zone, of which Ebola is about. And the reason why it's called The Hot Zone, this has to do with a place called the Biosafety Level 4. The Biosafety Level 4 is a facility in the Centers for Disease Control and USAMRIID, which is the United States Army Research Institute in Infectious Diseases, and in other universities, where the room where they study very toxic viruses or deadly viruses is like a spaceship. You got to put on 3 suits, 3 gloves, you have to take a shower, you have an airlock. It's as if it's just deadly. So to prevent all this, and that's why it's called the Hot Zone, the Biosafety Level 4. And I'm going to show you pictures of those two. I have everything here for you. Anyway, the Hot Zone came out in the 90s, and this is when the U.S. was first exposed to an outbreak of Ebola virus, but most of you never heard of it because it occurred in monkeys only. And what happened was they used monkeys to do research, on humans, but they have to use monkeys because they're primates. So their physiology is similar to humans. And whenever they take monkeys or other animals from other countries, they have to quarantine them. And in Reston, Virginia, and that's what I'm going to show you next, there was a facility called the Primate Holding Facility where they would take these monkeys. And it just so happened probably one of the monkeys was infected with the Ebola virus, and they gave it to the rest of the monkeys. And what made it worse, and we thought humans would get it too, was that the particular virus that infected the monkeys was airborne. This is the total worst case scenario you can have. But we lucked out. Why did we luck out? Because of the genes in that virus were only species specific to the monkeys and not the humans. So only the monkeys got it and they died. But they had to name a new strain called Ebola Reston. And I'll explain this to you after we watch that 15-minute segment, okay? So anyway, there's a lot to learn today. So in theory, the U.S. was exposed to Ebola, but we were just lucky that it did not infect humans. It was species specific only to the monkeys, okay? So I'm going to play that now for you. However, so we're going to watch this now. And I want to say where that show came from. Day One was, there's also a movie, by the way, a science fiction called Day One Now. I just heard about it, but it's totally different than this. This was a TV magazine which aired from 1993 to 95. I don't know if you remember a fellow by the name of, his name was Sawyer, okay? Diane Sawyer and Forrest Sawyer. I don't think they were related, they just have the same names. They were on that show. So I'm going to play this 15-minute segment for you, and this is the exact same segment that I showed my classes for the last 20 years, okay? So my classes we're actually exposed to the information of a virus. That's better than the virus itself, right? So we're going to see that right now. So let me get it. And I think you will enjoy this because this is where I first came acquainted with it. Now, I should point out, the quality isn't the greatest. I just videotaped it on my machine at the time. You know, we had to have the antenna set up and everything, but this is probably a copy of a copy, but it's the best I can do.
Diane, let's turn out of a story that sounds like it's straight out of Hollywood.
Let me shut off the
I don't know
lights.
if you remember a film called The Andromeda Strain, and there's a new movie just out called Outbreak. Both of them about viruses. Viruses. So deadly that they can kill almost anyone they touch. The reality is, there are countless numbers of these deadly viruses and more being found all the time. And there is a growing danger that sometime, somewhere, one of these viruses will break out and we'll have a medical crisis unlike anything we've seen before. Now, if you still think that sounds like Hollywood, this is a story you should watch. We've already come very, very close. This is one of mankind's most deadly predators, a virus called a filovirus, so lethal that the amount of the tip of this crystal is capable of wiping out the entire city of Boston. There is no treatment, no cure.
The victim suffers what amounts to a full-blown
Richard
biological
Preston, the author
meltdown.
of those books.
Richard Preston wrote The Hot Zone, a book about what happens to people infected with these deadly viruses.
You crash, you go into sudden shock, and then you die, often with huge amounts of blood pouring out of any or all of the orifices of the body, out of the nose, out of the mouth, everywhere.
No one knows exactly where filoviruses come from. The first strain ever discovered has been tracked to a remote area along the border between Kenya and Uganda, to a place called Kituum Cave. An even deadlier strain ravaged 46 villages along the Ebola River in Zaire. Virologist Carl Johnson called the killer Ebola Zaire.
You had a disease that was at least 80, sometimes 90% fatal. 1 week of incubation, 1 week of illness. And if it were spread by respiratory droplets, I don't think anything would have stopped it from going around the world.
Once the Western world thought it was safe from these invisible killers. Not anymore.
We are now biologically interconnected in a web, or a net. It's the web of airline routes. And what happens in Kinshasa on Tuesday happens in New York on Wednesday.
It all sounds like science fiction, but in fact, the U.S. has already come face to face with the possibility of a viral plague, a full-blown biological crisis, quietly shipped in on that global web. The story began in October of 1989, when a shipment of 100 wild monkeys like these, captured in the Philippine jungles, were sent to an animal quarantine facility right in the middle of suburban Reston, Virginia, a town of 57,000 people just 30 miles from the White House. The facility's veterinarian became alarmed as a growing number of the animals began to die.
The first thing that we heard was that there was a veterinarian at Reston who believed that he was seeing an outbreak of simian hemorrhagic fever virus.
The veterinarian contacted virologist Peter Jarling at USANRID, the U.S. Army's Research Institute for Infectious Diseases, based at Fort Detrick, Maryland. It is here that the Army studies hot viruses, killers coded biosafety level 4, known as BL4. How hazardous is a BL4 virus?
We believe that a single virus particle inhaled and finding its way to a receptor will infect a person.
If you get infected, the odds are you're in very bad trouble.
If you get infected, you're going to get very sick, and you better hope there's a treatment.
And there might not be.
And there might not be.
Jarling began testing tissue taken from monkeys that had died at the Reston quarantine facility. And he did find a virus that causes simian hemorrhagic fever, a disease that's harmless to humans. But something else was going on. He noticed that tissue cultures were quickly dying, possibly contaminated by bacteria. And so he decided to try a simple test. That turned out to be a terrible mistake.
What we did was we removed the tops from the flasks and just wafted our hand across the top to see if there was a characteristic smell of grape juice, which is something you associate with Pseudomonas, which is a frequent contaminating organism in a tissue culture flask. And when we didn't smell that, thought, well, there must be something else going on in the flask.
Microbiologist Tom Geisbert also smelled the flask and also found nothing. So he ran more tests on the
We're going to hear
samples.
more about him today.
And I looked at the electron
This fellow
microscope
here.
to my shocking horror, I realized that we had filovirus. It's extremely lethal in human beings. I was very, very horrified at first, to be honest with you.
My first reaction was that this was a joke. And I said, Tom, that's very cute. Now where's the real picture? And I could tell from his expression that he wasn't joking and he was seriously concerned.
Did your heart just catch?
Certainly my adrenaline surged. Here were monkeys by the hundreds in Reston, Virginia, harboring a filovirus. Andromeda had come.
Jarling and Geisbert thought they may have exposed themselves to a killer that should only have been examined in a sealed area called a hot zone.
This particular suite is down for renovation.
Here, scientists take extraordinary precautions against viruses like the one Jarling and Geisbert had just innocently smelled.
When you're putting on the spacesuit, you have a surgical glove which goes into this outer glove. You put a third glove over that as an extra level of precaution.
At this point, we are still safe from the virus.
That's correct. And if you're happy, you go into the hot zone. This is something we've
Knowing he may be running out of time,
known.
Jarling conducted still more tests inside the hot zone. He had to know which filovirus this was. His shock deepened when he discovered he was staring at a strain that looked exactly like the deadliest filovirus of all, Ebola Zaire.
He knew very well that he was looking at a level 4 monster from the rainforest. He knew that he was looking at a biological enemy of the human species of the highest degree.
And it could be the worst possible case.
Yeah, any range of scenarios would have occurred to him, from something innocuous to a kind of end of the world.
Jarling and Geisbert knew the first signs of infection would land them here, in a special sealed isolation chamber known as the Slammer, and only time would tell them if they were safe. But Jarling's first concern had to be the looming biological crisis in Reston. First up, his boss, Colonel C.J. Peters.
We knew that in the best of situations, we have bad time coming, and in the worst of situations, it could be worse than anybody had imagined.
They had a massive medical emergency on their hands. The Ebola is spreading through the monkeys. If it got out of the building, then it might begin to amplify itself through the human population of Washington, and indeed perhaps through North America. They didn't know what they had.
The press soon got wind of the crisis. Government spokesman played everything down.
The idea is that in the event of a major outbreak of disease like this, you don't want people to panic. Keep it quiet, and let's talk about this thing in fairly technical terms with the news media. And let's not mention spacesuits or soldiers.
But spacesuits and soldiers were exactly what was needed. While the Centers for Disease Control stood by to handle any human infections, the Army was called on to sterilize the new hot zone, the Reston holding facility.
We had never really done anything quite like this before. And so there was a lot of uncertainty.
The job fell to Colonel Jerry Jacks, chief of the veterinary division at USAMRIID. Jacks assembled a team of volunteers who would go into the facility wearing these lightweight portable spacesuits called Raycals. He told them what was coming.
It could be dangerous, and we want to make sure that you understand what it is that we're getting into. There's nobody else that can do this.
Army Specialist E4, Rhonda Williams.
And they said that we would be wearing like a motor on our back to supply air, and we would have things over our face. So that's a little scary, because then you know right there that it could be airborne.
There was one more problem. The Raycal suits were paper thin.
These monkeys are armed with razor-sharp fangs. These are rainforest animals. They use the fangs as weapons. And the monkey could potentially have been a virus bomb of Ebola. An angry monkey is almost unstoppable. These monkeys have 5 prehensile limbs, 2 hands, 2 feet which can grab like hands, a tail which can wrap around your neck, and then the monkey will bite you all over the face with slashing attacks from his teeth.
Friday, December 1st, 1989. While the nation prepared for another workday, an unmarked military column prepared for battle. Civilian cars filled with soldiers in civilian clothes to avoid attention. moving out in the morning rush hour to America's first biological war. They drove to the back of the holding facility, changed into the Raycal suits, and stepped onto the front lines.
And just as I stepped through, one of the employees of the facility came walking down the hallway in his street clothes, and I'm looking at him and he's looking at me, and I could see that, you know, he was going, oh my God, these guys are coming in here like they're going to the moon.
In the rush and confusion of the operation, some of the Reston workers had not been alerted the Army was coming. To make matters worse, the heating system had broken down, and the air was stifling.
You could feel your scrub sticking to you. That's how hot it was, and there's sweat coming off our foreheads. And the whole time, the inside of our masks were fogging up. First thing that hit me was the smell, automatically. It was dark, and you could hear the monkeys in the cages, but they weren't very loud at that point. They usually didn't get loud until you walked into the rooms, and they would go crazy.
The mission for Staff Sergeant Curtis Claggis: trap and tranquilize the monkeys.
We used a contraption to pin them in the cage to restrain their arms and their head, of course, so they wouldn't bite us. It was definitely a challenge getting into the cage because you had to reach in and grab a leg and hopefully he didn't scratch you. And one of the things that made it bad is that because some of the cages were so low, we had to get down on our hands and knees, and you kind of have to look through the top, and it was hard to see through the cracks in it.
And it went on for hour after hour after hour, people standing on their feet, meanwhile exposed continually to the threat of Ebola virus.
But the worst was yet to come. New tests showed that monkeys throughout the building had contracted the virus. That could mean the Ebola virus was airborne, the deadliest form possible. All the monkeys would have to be killed. And even worse, there were fears the virus had jumped from monkey to man. Colonel Nancy Jacks, Jerry's wife, and a pathologist running tests on the monkeys, had been monitoring her husband's progress.
I heard that one of the civilian caretakers at Reston had actually gone outside and thrown up that day. And I don't remember which day that was, I honestly don't. But I know at the time we thought, oh, here it goes.
Our worst fears were about to be confirmed, that people had been exposed and were beginning to get sick. And where would it all end? It was kind of hard to assess at that point.
But remarkably, just at the worst moment of the crisis, the scientists noticed something that didn't make sense. The operation had gone on for days now, and Peter Jarling and Tom Geisbert were still completely healthy. So were several caretakers who had certainly been exposed. How could that be? The answer seemed like a miracle.
When they picked apart the genes of this virus, they found out that the thing is almost identical to Ebola Zaire. They're cousins, very close to one another.
It appeared to be Ebola Zaire, which is almost always fatal.
Yes,
They had been exposed,
yes,
but they
but
were...
they didn't die. So therefore, the strain in the monkey house was apparently something else, and they eventually identified it as a new strain of Ebola virus, which is now called Ebola Reston.
The scientists had stared down the barrel of a rifle, and a hammer had dropped on an empty chamber. The first known filovirus that somehow seems to be harmless to humans. In America's first biological war, the enemy turned out to be unarmed. The Reston facility was sterilized and eventually closed. It is scheduled to be torn down this year. Today, scientists say the Reston crisis is a warning. There are countless viruses in rainforests around the world. Some of them are certainly killers, waiting to be found.
Did we dodge a bullet on it? Had this been the virulent Zaire strain, those animal caretakers would have been deathly ill, perhaps would have died. So they didn't really dodge the bullet, they took the bullet, and we were just lucky this time.
It's as if you have a key that was being fitted into a lock, and the last tumbler failed to click. If the last tumbler had clicked and that thing had been airborne and lethal in people, we would have had a nightmare on our hands.
At a time when we are increasingly vulnerable to these viruses, the U.S. Army has cut its budget for this research up to 50% since the Reston outbreak, and it is expected to cut the budget another 20% next year.
So, remember, this was filmed, this was broadcast around February 23rd, 1995. Okay? So, I just thought that was the introduction to this, and this was the show I showed my classes, so all of them knew about this particular strain. Anyway, I thought that was interesting, wasn't it? And so we knew about all these things, and we know about a lot of things, we just don't do anything about them, and I'll tell you more about that as we progress. Now, this picture, believe it or not, just came last week. There's a man, he's dressed in this because he's at an airport waiting for his plane. So this guy kind of exaggerated. This was a real picture, okay, that I got on. Well, he's just sitting there at some airport, I forget where it is. So some people are panicking, and evidently this makes good for a picture, but he might, I wonder how he gets through security though. Anyway, now, this was Newsweek that just came out a few weeks ago, okay? And so we're really concerned about it. And what do they mean by a back door? We're talking about bushmeat, and I'll talk about that later. Bushmeat is the meat that they get from Africa when they kill animals, including bats. And then they kill the animals and then they cook it. And they're worried that many of these people are going to bring it into the United States, as a gift to their relatives. Okay, and that's what the fear is about. And we'll talk more about that later. But just to show you, this was the cover of Newsweek about 3-4 weeks ago, not very long. And Africans, they have customs, okay, about, virtually everything. And we're going to explain, too, why the people came down with Ebola. That had to do with the way they bury people. And I'll explain that to you also. Anyway, so let's continue in the order. Here are other viral infections, okay, that are associated with the human body. And we have many types of viruses. We have encephalitis, that affect the brain. And we have eye infections. We have pneumonia. We have something like polio. We have digestive system viruses, sexually transmitted viruses, skin viruses, liver viruses, cardiovascular, the pharynx. We have a whole bunch of viruses, okay? But the Ebola seems to affect a large part of the organism. We've had other outbreaks of various diseases from 1995 to 96, including Ebola. We see them all over the world. Fortunately, like this one, was only 10 cases of mad cow disease, which is caused by a prion. I won't mention that today, but that's just a little piece of protein that somehow winds up in the nervous system. And it's like a protein that gets bent out of shape and causes other proteins in the brain or the nervous system to be bent. Hence the term, mad cow disease in cows, or Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in humans, or Kuru, which takes place in Papua New Guinea. And we don't have time to talk about all that, but these are all illnesses. Another common viral infection is dengue, hemorrhagic fever, and this is spread by mosquitoes. Notice that in 1995, we had 275,000 cases in the middle Americas there, and this is spread by mosquitoes, and it's also known as break bone fever because the pain is so great with the virus. But anyway, these are just some other viruses that I want to talk to you about. Now, let's get on with Ebola. What exactly is Ebola? Ebola is known as a filovirus, which means it's long and thin, okay? And it belongs to the family Filoviridae. I'm not going to go into the order of viruses, but I have a whole bunch of them here in a special booklet about the known families of viruses, but I'm not going to get into that. What are viruses? Okay, this is what many people do not know. What's the difference between a virus and a bacteria and something like this? First, let me show you some examples of viruses. There are many types of viruses. This one on the left is an Ebola virus, and this is a chart that compares the Ebola virus to other viruses. Notice it's pretty long. This one is, the Ebola virus is quite long and thin. Notice, why is it called a filovirus? Because it looks differently than the others. You see? These are long and thin strands, okay? They can measure over maybe 1,500 nanometers. Now, a nanometer is one billionth of a meter, okay? So 1 meter, about like this, is composed of 1 billion nanometers. And we also measure wavelengths of light in nanometers. So you can imagine how small viruses are, okay? They're impossible to see with the regular light microscope. You need the electron microscopes to see them. And this is a colorized picture of the electron microscope, taken probably with a transmission electron microscope. And with the transmission, the difference between a transmission electron microscope and a scanning electron microscope is that transmission, you see flat surfaces, whereas the scanning gives you a three-dimensional picture. Okay? Now, I'm going to show you what a virus is. Here we have two types of viruses. We have a DNA virus and an RNA viruses. Okay. We know that there are two nucleic acids. These are acids found in the nucleus of all cells. Okay? Viruses are only made up of two basic things. Either RNA or DNA, which are a nucleic acid, only one. They're never both, surrounded by a protein coat. So RNA stands for ribonucleic acid, DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and what that means is the sugar, ribose, has one extra oxygen than the deoxyribose sugar in the DNA. Anyway, the viruses are either DNA viruses, where they have a core of DNA in the middle, surrounded by a protein, or RNA viruses. Again, they have RNA surrounded by a protein coat. Now, some of these are specific for different types of organisms. Basically, I want to point out something. The majority of plant diseases are caused by fungi, but you do have some diseases caused by viruses. Those plants, as a rule, which are infected with viral diseases, are caused basically by RNA viruses, okay? However, there is one called the coronavirus, which is a DNA virus, but like I say, that's the exception. The majority of plant diseases are caused by RNA viruses, okay? And many animal diseases are caused by DNA viruses. But again, you have some animals which are caused by, which do get RNA viruses, such as, yes, you go ahead, don't worry about it. Those are the ones which infect animals. Now, what does Ebola look like? Okay, this is a diagrammatic picture of Ebola. And over here, we have something called a glycoprotein here, and then we have the core of RNA in the middle. Thank you, Andy, for that. Okay. So here's the RNA surrounded by the protein, and then we have these other things here. See where it says viral RNA? This is Ebola's genetic material. Okay, and this virus only has 7 genes, okay, compared to the 30,000 or so that humans have, okay? Every cell that humans have, they figured out now from the Human Genome Project, we have about 30,000 genes, okay? They used to think it was 100,000, then it went down to 80,000, now they figured out there's only 30,000. Okay, anyway, so this is what the structure of Ebola looks like. Now, we have just 7 viral groups, and what the DS stands for, this is virus as a rule, this stands for double-stranded DS, SS is single-stranded, and we have double-stranded RNA viruses, RNA plus, minus, etc., and that has something to do with the way these things transcribe. I'm not going to go into that, but I just want to point out that the Ebola virus is a minus single-strand RNA virus, okay? But I'm not going to go into virology here, I just wanted to point this out. These are the groups of viruses. RNA, again, is SS, stands for single-stranded virus. Okay, now, what you see here is a typical bacterial cell. As you can see, it's a real cell. It has a cell wall, has a cell membrane, and it has 1 chromosome, okay? Viruses really don't have a chromosome. They just have a little bit of DNA. So as you can see, a bacterial cell is a lot more complicated, okay? So a bacterial cell is actually a cell. A virus is just made out of protein with a little bit of RNA. Now, can you say viruses are living? That's a good question. Some people say yes, some people say no. However, according to the list of characteristics of life, the only thing virus does, which even resembles life, is to reproduce. And in order to do that, it has to steal the DNA of the genetic material from the host, the cell. So it doesn't eat, it doesn't have enzymes, it has no respiration, so it doesn't have any cell structure, so it's based on our definition of life, it doesn't fall into those categories. Now, here we see an actual photograph of viruses attacking a bacterial cell. These, by the way, are known as bacteriophages. It comes from the word bacteria, and then phage. Phage is the Greek word from phago, which means to eat. So literally, a bacteriophage means bacteria eater, okay? And they look like little lunar landers. This is an actual transmission electron micrograph of the bacteriophages. It's real cool. Of course, this is colorized. All these pictures are generally in black and white, but we can computerize color to show the contrast. Over here, we have now the list of strains of known Ebola viruses, okay? Now, there's a term, strain. Many of you have heard the term strain, okay? It's like it could be considered something like a race, a variety, a breed, okay? When we talk about dogs, we talk about breeds. When we talk about apples and pears and potatoes, we use the word variety. When we talk about people, you know, different races, you know, where they're from, okay? So a strain is somewhat similar. It's just a variant subtype of an organism, okay? Which means they're not exactly alike, but they have lots of similarities. The 5 main types of Ebola known so far was the first one, named Ebola Zaire, and this was the one where it was first discovered in 1976 in Zaire, which is now the Belgian Congo, okay, the Republic, the Belgian Congo. And then we have the Sudan, and we know about the Sudan is right next to Egypt in northern Africa. And then we have the Thai forest Ebola, which is actually in the Ivory Coast. It's also named Ebola Ivory Coast, which is in West Africa. We have the Reston Ebola virus, which was the one I just showed you now, that took place in Reston, Virginia, which is the only known airborne one so far. Knock on wood, not to be a little superstitious, but we hope there are no airborne. And then we have this funny name, Bundibugyo Ebola virus, which comes from Uganda, okay? The land of Idi Amin, those of you who don't remember him. But anyway, this is the main strains of Ebola now. Now, how did Ebola get the name? Here we can see here, Ebola got their name from the Ebola River in northern Congo Basin of Central Africa, and they first emerged in 1976, okay? These are also similar to the Marburg virus, which also was found in Germany, by the way. So these are all problematic ones. And then this mentions also a little bit about in the Sudan and other countries, what percentage of people died with the Ebola. Now, Ebola, as a rule, used to have about a 90% death rate. Then it went down to 40% lately, and then it's back up again to 50 to 70%. So it does have some variations, okay? So this gives you a brief history of it, and I'll just read the last sentence. The 5th species, the BDBB, which that's the one from Uganda, was discovered in 2007, which was only about 7 years ago, okay? Almost exactly 7 years ago in the Bundibugyo district of Uganda, near the border with the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And in this case, fortunately, this particular strain only causes death in 25% of the cases. All right. Now, on the news, we hear about 3 countries where Ebola is. We hear about it in Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. Well, if you look on this map of Africa, what a coincidence. They're all lined up with each other. You see it? We have Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. By the way, there are 4 countries in the world that have the word Guinea in it, okay? I believe the word Guinea, somebody told me, means beautiful woman, okay? I believe that's what it means. But there are 4 countries with that name, with different names, but Guinea is in part of the name. Okay, so here again, we have Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. And this is the area where we find Ebola. Now, also on the news, we heard about Nigeria, which, according to the Nigerians, they're Ebola-free as we speak, okay? We hope that's true. I kind of doubt it, but they say they're Ebola-free. But notice, Nigeria, which, by the way, Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa. Roughly 1 out of every 5 Africans is a Nigerian. And I was told that by a Nigerian person here. And there's no reason not to believe, because I teach environmental science at other schools, and we discuss populations, and Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa, people-wise. And of course, they're being messed up by the Shell Oil Company, which is another issue because they're polluting it with oil, and I don't want to get into that. So anyway, here we see Africa. And by the way, here is the Sudan right there. So it's right under Egypt. And by the way, just recently, a couple years ago, a new country was made. It was called South Sudan. It's supposed to be the 54th country in Africa. All right. Anyway, now, I want to show you this. This is what I call the death chart. The only way to make it big, I was trying to deal with that, is to do it this way. So what I want to do is just show you what's going on here. Okay. This is a chart that ranges from 1976 to 2012. And this shows you, let me go up a little bit here, about deaths and, whoops, let me just go back here. Okay. This shows you the deaths of people. Here's the country, Ebola virus species, cases, and deaths, okay? So it doesn't matter which species here, just look at the cases and deaths, which is at the upper right, and we notice that, yeah, it's kind of hard to do. Well, let's start just with the Congo. There was one case, and there was one death, so that goes to 100%, which, you know, one doesn't mean much. But if you look at all these numbers, here we had 425 cases, and about half died, 53%. In the Congo, you know, see what year that was. See, I wanted to just show it this way. Here in 2007, we had 264 known cases. Again, known is always the key word, with 187 deaths. That accounts to about 71%, okay? So if you have one case and one death, is that really 100%? You know, of course. Now, if that person lived, you had 100% life. So these numbers really don't mean that much, but when you have more to work with, you know you're getting a pretty good sample. Here again, in Zaire, and let's see what year that was. This was in 1995, which is only 20 years ago. We had 315 cases with 254 deaths. Comes out to about 81% death rate. So, again, the people who survive probably have better medical care, or their body is adjusted. They have a good immune system to overcome this virus. And actually, we make use of those people who actually overcame the virus because they have antibodies floating around their body, and they use the serum from that person to give to other people, and the other people will get better from the serum. That's known as passive immunization. But anyway, we'll talk more about that later. Now, how do people get the virus? Okay, this is what I wanted to mention before. People get the virus by direct contact. Now, in Africa, why did so many people get the virus? Because you have to understand their culture. When a relative dies or somebody dies, they just don't bury them. They eviscerate them, which means they take out their guts. So therefore, they're touching the liquids or the body parts. And if that person died from Ebola, all you have to do is touch the person. That's how you get it. You don't get it by airborne, okay? At least so far, knock on wood, we don't have it. So that's how they got it. So, what has happened? If you read the literature, like I have, I've been avidly reading what's going on there. Sierra Leone, they have a custom now of hugging people when they see each other. You know, with friends, relatives, they don't hug anymore. They're afraid to get Ebola. So this whole disease and the fear of the disease is changing the culture of many of these countries, okay? So you really do not want to come in any contact with blood, saliva, anything of a person with it. And here we see the modes of infection. We have unsterilized needles, hospital contagion, and person-to-person contact. Now, we heard a lot about these doctors going over there, doctors and nurses going over there, and you really have to admire them, because these are the ones that are physically touching the patient. You know, they're washing them, giving them shots, doing all sorts of things with them. So these are the real heroes of the world on the front lines, okay? And of course, you don't want to shake hands with everybody. Now, as for the symptoms occur between 2 and 21 days. That's why they made a big deal about this nurse in Texas. I think it was, or wherever she, oh no, she went to New Jersey, then to Maine, right. The Maine nurse, right, I forget her name. Anyway, she's actually a smart lady, because she knew, you know, she had no symptoms, and she's a nurse, you know, and actually I think she flew on the plane, and she asked the CDC if she can go, and they said yes, because she didn't have a fever. So, see, at this time, nobody really knew what's going on. They really didn't know how to handle it, you understand? That's why there's so much commotion. But now I think they're getting a handle on it. But there is some good news in this, and that is the ones who at least come to America survive. And as you see a few days later, it's just walking around as if nothing happened. But if you watched 60 Minutes last week, on Sunday, they showed you Ebola. Ebola was headlined in the 60 Minutes show on Sunday evening. Anyway, these are the symptoms of Ebola virus, and you know, the usual fever, vomiting, sore throat, etc. And then, if you're long enough in the body, it actually causes bleeding from all your orifices. That's why it's called a hemorrhagic fever, because you bleed, okay? And I'm going to show you what goes on with an animation. They have lots of stuff for you. Anyway, here's a picture of various types of symptoms. If you can't read, sometimes they do this, you know, in airports, they just show you pictures of stuff. Now, before I get to this animation, which lasts 5 minutes, I want to explain to you, they're going to mention something called a dendritic cell. These are antigen presenting cells, which means what it is, it's like a receptor. An antigen is a foreign body, okay? A bacteria is an antigen, a fungus, even little bits of poison called toxoids. Now, you have antigens in your body by the blood types. Now, you have antigen A, antigen B, okay? How come it's not attacking yourself? Well, because you know, that's the way the blood is, okay? You're one blood type. If you have type A, then you have the A antigen. If you have type B, you have the B antigen, but your body is immune to that. However, if you're type A and you're given type B blood, then, you know, you're going to have a reaction, an agglutination, and you may die if you have too much of the other blood type in you. But in this case, we're talking about antigen-presenting cells. The antigen is going to attach to the cells, okay? And so what happens is their main function is to process the antigen material and present it on the cell surface to the T cell, which is a white blood cell in your bloodstream, okay? Now, I want to play this for you. This lasts about 5 minutes. It's totally animation, but he gives you a good explanation of how you get infected. This one will explain. We can get it. It's getting there. There it is. Come on. Oh. Okay, come on. Just take a while. We should.
What makes Ebola so dangerous? How can a virus overwhelm the very complex defense system of the body so quickly and so effectively? Let's take a look at what Ebola does. Ebola is a virus. A virus is a very small thing. A bit of RNA or DNA and a few proteins in a hull. It has no ability to do anything by itself whatsoever, and can only survive and proliferate by infecting cells. To avoid this, we have the immune system. The immune system is super complex, so we developed a visual system that makes it easy to understand. So it looks like this. Let's concentrate on the part that's critical to understanding Ebola and ignore the rest. So, usually, dendritic cells would activate an army of antivirus cells, support cells and antibody factories that would, together with the guard cells, wipe out the infection in a matter of days. But when Ebola strikes, it directly attacks the immune system. Some of the first cells it takes over are the dendritic cells, the brains of the immune system. The Ebola virus enters a dendritic cell by binding onto receptors for cell transport. Once it's inside, it dissolves its outer hull and releases its genetic material, nuclear proteins, and enzymes. In a nutshell, it takes over the cell, disables the cell's protective mechanisms, and reprograms it. The cell now becomes a virus production machine and uses its resources to build Ebola viruses. Once the cell is saturated, it dissolves the cell membrane and millions of viruses are released into the tissue. The virus not only prevents the dendritic cell from activating the specialized antivirus forces, it manipulates it into sending signal proteins that trick the specialized cells into ending their own lives prematurely. So the immune system is seriously disrupted and unable to react, while the virus rapidly multiplies. We're talking billions. There are cells that should deal with infected cells, the natural killer cells. But they also get infected and just die before they can prevent the disease from spreading. At the same time, Ebola infects the guard cells of the body, macrophages and monocytes. Not only managing to circumvent their defenses, it also manipulates them to signal to the cells that make up the blood vessels, telling them to release fluids into the body. Usually this makes sense, but in this case, it just causes mayhem. All over the body, neutrophils are activated, awoken by the virus and the macrophages' signals. They're not very effective against viruses, and should not be involved in this fight and begin to do lots of stuff they shouldn't do. The neutrophils signal the blood vessels to release more fluid, causing internal bleeding. Another area of the body Ebola attacks is the liver. The virus finds it very easy to enter the liver, and it quickly starts killing loads of liver cells and causing organ failure and more internal bleeding. And all of those things are going on at the same time. As the virus spreads, it's like nukes exploding everywhere. One incident of this in one region would be problem enough, but now it's starting to happen everywhere at once. All the mechanisms the immune system has evolved to handle infections work against you, and the virus continues to spread and finally begins to infect more and more body cells while the body desperately struggles to stay alive. In a desperate last effort to turn the tide, the immune system launches a cytokine storm. A cytokine storm is an SOS signal that causes the immune system to launch all of its weapons all at once in a desperate kamikaze attack. This hurts the virus, but leaves behind tons of collateral damage, especially in the blood vessels. Paradoxically, the healthier the immune system, the more damage it can do to itself. More and more fluid leaves the bloodstream. Blood pours out of every opening of the body. You become seriously dehydrated. There's just not enough blood left to supply the organs with oxygen, and cells begin to die. If you reach this point, the chance of you dying is very high. Currently, 6 out of 10 infected die from Ebola. Wow. Okay, Ebola is nasty. So it's time to panic, right? No, not even close. The severity of Ebola gets papers sold and YouTube videos shared, so everybody is talking about Ebola. But currently, the only way to get infected by Ebola is to come into contact with the bodily fluids of a person who shows symptoms or from an infected bat. So, just don't do that. Ebola has killed 5,000 people since June 2014. The common flu kills up to 500,000 people each year. Malaria kills up to 1 million each year. 3,000 people every single day, 10 children since this video started. So, even if Ebola is terrible and scary, don't let yourself be scared. The most infectious thing about Ebola is the media hype around it. You could learn a bit more about the immune system though.
This gave you some information. Anyway, okay. So, let's okay, so now let's continue where we left off. Okay, so let's go on to this one and next. All right, so here's the incubation period. We mentioned that, dendritic cells. Now, here on the left, this shows you a little bit about the Ebola virus infects cells by pinching into the cell and injecting a small piece of RNA. Remember, this is an RNA virus. The RNA hijacks the machinery of the cell and uses it to create more copies, and as we saw in the movie, it makes millions and millions. And I'm going to go into this in a few minutes more, but I might as well tell you, see, Ebola survivors have antibodies in their blood, which means they survived, so you might as well use those antibodies to treat other people. And what they do is they transfuse the serum into other people, and what the serum is, they centrifuge out all the cells, white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets, and give them the liquid portion, and they hope the antibodies are in there. And then the drug ZMapp, I'm going to show you how that's made. And remember, I told you to pay attention to Tom Geisbert, because what you saw 20 years ago, he is now a professor, and he actually developed a vaccine against Ebola. And I just want to mention one thing. It should have been They actually had the Ebola vaccine ready for testing in 2010 and 2011, but the pharmaceuticals didn't want to get involved because they felt there's no money in it, or why should we bother? And that just proves that, you know, we got to think ahead, but we don't, and I'm going to explain more about that later. This is why we're in a mess with everything, but I'll explain later. Anyway, as for treatment, okay, there are a few treatments for Ebola. Mainly, you give them intravenous fluids, you maintain oxygen status and blood pressure, you have to treat other infections when they occur, and they do have some experimental vaccines. However, recovery from Ebola depends on good supportive care and the patient's own immune response. And this is why in Africa, a lot of the people die because, you know, they really don't have clinics that they can go to for checkups, you know, every year, all right? And the people are not that healthy, you know, many are parasitized, so there are many reasons. However, you heard about the doctors that came back here, and you see them a few days later, they're walking the streets. That's because we have good medical care. This is the United States, you know, we don't have infectious diseases or parasites as many as in Africa. So that's a big issue, and this is why I get angry sometimes at our government, because I feel we should help the other countries instead of just sitting back and say that's their problem. It's going to be our problem too if we don't do anything, okay? See, and we'll go more into this later. And I'm very vocal about these issues. All right, anyway, now, since we're talking about this, let me show you how ZMAP works. And you're going to actually see Tom Geisbert now explain a little bit of what's going on. Again, he's the same one that we saw before. So let me get this going. And it should work. Just give it time to get on there.
With 300 acres of New York City waterfront,
It's always advertisements.
and
Nothing you
Goldman
can do
Sachs
about
brings
that.
together people, capital.
So if you want, go get Goldman Sachs
for
stuff, whatever they're
revitalization
advertising.
launch, and the Brooklyn Navy Yard makes progress.
Yes, right, okay. Okay, come on, let's go, there we go. There it is, okay, that's what we'll do, come on.
2 Americans infected with Ebola underwent an experimental treatment for the virus that had never before been used on humans. Here's how the ZMAP drug works.
ZMAP is
Thomas Geisbert.
a cocktail or combination of 3 different monoclonal antibodies.
Antibodies are Y-shaped proteins the immune system uses to attack foreign objects, like viruses. Monoclonal antibodies are a kind of lab-produced antibody
It's only last a couple of minutes.
manipulated for a specific purpose.
Typically what would be done would be to like immunize mice. They would generate an immune response and you would get a mouse monoclonal antibody.
When injected into a patient,
The monoclonal antibodies would bind to different regions on the Ebola virus surface, just like a protein.
glycoproteins are part of the virus's envelope and help it infect new cells.
This would then prevent or interfere with the ability of Ebola virus to enter a host cell, and importantly to grow in that host cell. So it would block it from making more copies of itself. It wouldn't be able to replicate. It wouldn't be able to
Well, at least that one was a short one. Okay, we can only do what we can do. Okay, now, if you saw the movie, A Contagion, you'll find out that if you wait till the very end, have any of you ever seen Contagion? No? Okay, well I saw it. It begins with day 2, the movie, okay? And day 2, a virus outbreak, etc., etc. And at the very end, you see what happens with day 1. And I'll explain to you what happens. In the end, which was day 1, you see a bat. A bat is eating a fruit. He drops the fruit. A pig eats the fruit. That particular pig is brought to the slaughterhouse. Well, anyway, the pig's whole body, I guess they took out the guts. They brought it to a restaurant, and you see the chef. He's basting the pig. He's putting his hands in the mouth of the pig, and he wipes his hands on his apron because it's got blood and stuff on it. Anyway, Gwyneth Paltrow, she was the so-called patient 0 in the movie. She's eating there, if what I remember correctly. Remember, I saw this a few years ago. Anyway, she wants to talk to the chef. Oh, did you see it? Right? I think she says she wants to talk to the chef. So she goes into the kitchen, and I think she speaks. She says, hey, I want to talk to the chef. I want to shake your hand. So the chef wipes his hands on his apron, which is full of blood, and he shakes her hand. And that's where the virus was. It was on his apron, and he gave it to her because it was from the pig. You see, you actually see him basting the mouth of the pig. I myself don't eat pig because I could be Jewish, you know, so we don't eat that. But anyway, so that's what happened. Now, they used to believe that the Ebola virus was originally in monkeys, but now they believe it's in fruit bats. So I want to show you a little bit about fruit bats, bats as carriers, okay? The theory of bats as carriers is that they drop fruit or seeds and feces, and the animals eat infected fruit, the ones they drop, and the humans hunt bushmeat, okay? This is a term which includes forest animals, including bats. Hunters will sell dead animals as bushmeat. I just want to make the point, this is no relation to the former occupant of the White House, just I mentioned that. Anyway, so bats are widely eaten in West Africa. They're either smoked or grilled, okay? And let me show you some examples of bats species. They're mainly fruit bats, okay? These are all fruit bats, okay? Now, we heard the legends about vampire bats. They do exist, but mainly they suck the blood of chickens and cows, and I don't think people are really dying because of blood-sucking bats. Anyway, I just want to point out, too, that most people don't know, there are roughly 4,800 known mammal species on the planet, of which 20% are bats. Isn't that neat? You know what mammals are. They nurse their young, they have hair, and things like this, okay? And there are about 4,800, you know, rats, rabbits, cows, giraffes, zebras, etc. But there are about 12,040 bat species, and that's 1/4 of the mammal population on the planet. I know most people don't know that, but that's the problem. I mean, well, the problem is now, actually that's good. Bats play an incredibly important role in planting seeds and plants in the rainforest. However, if bats are confirmed as the reservoir of the disease, forest colony communities would try to destroy all the bats. And this would be catastrophic for the planet because they pollinate and they plant seeds, you see? Remember, people are afraid of bats just like the movie Jaws. They're afraid of sharks. Come on. Very rarely are there shark attacks, okay? We just hear about the bad ones. Normally, sharks don't even like people. They spit them out. Of course, no, they do. Unfortunately, though, of course, the ones that have been spit out, they've been cut pretty badly, you know, by the teeth. And anyway, the fruit bats belong to the order Chiroptera, and there are about 173 species in 42 genera. There is an organization called Bat Conservation International, which actually cares about bats. It's a really good organization because we know bats are incredibly important for the functioning of the planet. Now, just one thing about bats, I know some people who actually have them where they live in the country, and they're almost mosquito-free there because the bats eat the mosquitoes. So bats actually play a very important role. And by the way, here's the website of Bat Conservation International. It's www.bcci.org. www.batcon.org. You should all investigate it. It's really a very good organization. Now, I want to tell you about bushmeat, and I have pictures of it. Bushmeat could be infected with germs, okay? And people will eat it, you know, they steam it, they cook it, and I'll show you pictures of those too. And you may come in contact with the fluids, and those fluids contain the virus. And here we see some examples of bushmeat. There's a monkey. Here we see other animals in Africa. Here we see bats, okay? We see some beaver-like animals. These are monkeys. It's pretty bad the way they treat their animals, but, you know. Anyway, this picture is one of the most fantastic pictures I have ever seen. Okay, this comes from Africa. This comes from a book called Biohazard, The Hot Zone and Beyond, which I picked up at Barnes & Noble's many years ago. And what you see there is the most incredible sight I have ever seen. Can you imagine if this were a hospital in the United States? What you see here is a patient being treated for Ebola, and yet lying on the floor is a dead Ebola patient. And if you look at the quality of the hospital room, look at that. The beds don't have mattresses. They're old, rusty. You got blood on the floor. I mean, you know, this type of situation disturbs me because it means the developed countries don't give a damn. You know, we should do something to help these countries out, but then they have these governments, you know, which don't even care. But we have to tell the governments, look, we're going to give you all the facilities. We're not going to give you money. We're going to build you new hospitals. We're going to put piping systems and everything. Then you wouldn't have this situation, because when you have lots of these, we will be infected, because let's say these have some relatives who want to take a trip to the United States or Europe, right? And they're going to infect whatever people they see. You understand? So this is really an incredible picture. I always show this because, as Confucius said, one picture is worth 1,000 words, right? Okay. Now, here we see some scenes in Africa of treatment people. These are all workers in huts and tents working with Ebola. Here we see them the way they're carrying dead bodies. Notice how they're all dressed. And these are the gloves. They wash them and let them dry so they can reuse them again. And now, I want to talk to you about Liberia. This also is a very sad story. Liberia now, according to this, has 50 doctors. It's actually 45 as we speak. Liberia has 45 doctors with a population of 4 million people. Now, of course, that's one of the major ones on the front lines of the Ebola outbreak. Now, I did a calculation. Let's compare the number of physicians and the population of the U.S. The population of the U.S. is roughly 316 million people, okay, as we speak. Now, there are roughly, almost exactly, 893,851 doctors in the United States. Half are primary care physicians, the others are specialists, okay? I did research, and over there, this is the webpage from Henry J. Kaiser Family Foundation. So, what that means is, for every 353 people in America, you got one doctor. In Liberia, you have one doctor for 88,888, give or take. Isn't that an incredible number? Okay? And so you be the judge yourself. Okay, now, how do they examine Ebola? Okay, what they do is they use bio levels 1 through 4, okay? I'm not going to go into the details. This is a chart which shows you what goes on there. How do you measure different types of organisms? Remember, as I told you in the beginning, Ebola is a bio-level safety 4, which means it's the most extraordinary precautions. I'm just going to show you pictures, okay? Here we see a biosafety level 1. Notice the worker just has a lab coat and gloves, no big deal. This is what we do here in the labs. I told you I teach biology, and Starlin teaches it, right? We have the equivalent of a level 1 biosafety, because we're not dealing with anything toxic, okay? The most dangerous organism we deal with is E. coli, which is on a plate, and it's not dangerous, okay? But then, as you work with more virulent or more deadly organisms, you have to wear more clothing and be more safe, okay? Notice this girl has more gloves over. She probably has a mask for her face. This one, the level 3, he's got air being piped in, but he's not in a spacesuit, okay? He's in a lab, he's working under a hood. A hood is like you use in chemistry. You work while you have a suction air blowing up, okay, inside the hood, so nothing's getting out. And then, of course, the bio-level safety 4 is what we saw in the movie. You're wearing a spacesuit, you have to go through an airlock, you have 3 sets of gloves, okay? So this is the biosafety level 4, and this is basically the hot zone area. You can tell the difference in clothes, okay? It's obvious this person may not be in a biosafety. He might be in a special room, but it's not airlocked and stuff, I don't believe. Now, how to avoid Ebola? You avoid direct contact, no bushmeat, avoid areas where infections are prevalent, understand how the disease spreads, use soap and water, and avoid dead bodies. They used to burn them. I think that's unfortunately the best way. They should disinfect. They put a lot of disinfectant on the bodies everywhere, and then I think they might burn them. Now, I'm going to show you this. Oops, let me go back here. This is what I'm going to show you next. Is something incredible, okay? Let me go back here. Where am I? I lost the spot. Let me just go back. Hold on a second. I want to show you something. Let me get it. It's called Matters of Scale, okay? And I took this from World Watch magazine. Here it is, okay? Now, I am going to blow this up for you because there's one thing I want to show you. Matters of Scale is a certain type of article that they used in World Watch magazine, okay? World Watch is still around, but they stopped making the magazine. Okay? Now, a Matters of Scale, they show you the ridiculous in numbers, okay, of various issues. Let me just show you one in particular. I want to discuss this particular side up here, where it says the number of new medicinal drugs which are increasingly targeting diseases of affluence and overconsumption, similar to the rich countries in the West, in industrial countries developed between, how many drugs were developed between 1975 in 1997, we see 1,223 drugs. Got it? Now, how many drugs are developed aimed at treating diseases which kill a lot of people, such as malaria? Here, a number of these new drugs that aim to treat malaria, schistosomiasis, that's a disease found in contaminated water with snails. We discussed this in my class. And other tropical diseases that are significant killers in countries. Significant killers in developing countries. 13. What does that tell you? There's 100 times more drugs for the affluent people than for the poor, which actually kill millions. You see? Did you ever hear of something called restless leg disorder? I mean, they come up with all these diseases. You know, I think the pharmaceuticals invent diseases to treat rich Americans. I doubt any person in Africa is going to look for a pill for restless leg syndrome, you know? I mean, so you see the point that I'm driving at. Now, more on this. Let me go back here. Let me get this down to 100. Now, I want to show you the companies that make Ebola drugs. Okay, these are 5. Tecmira, BioCryst, Sarepta, New Link Genetics, and MAP. MAP was the one that Tom Geisbert was associated with, showing you how that was made. Okay, now, what I want to do is I'm going to be playing 2 sets of recordings that only last a few minutes about why we don't have drugs already available, okay? I want to show you. And I recorded these specifically for this. I don't know if any of you know Mike Malloy. Anybody know him? Yeah, I listen to him all the time because he thinks like me, which, you know, he tells it the way it is, at least the way I see it, okay? And I want to play a little bit here. And this is incredible. And so let me get it. Let me get my Mike Malloy here. Let's see which one is it. Just a second. Let me get it. Hold on. Put it there, I just forgot what. Hold on. Now, there we go. Shade, Mike Malloy. There
scientist at the Scripps Research Institute in La Jolla, California. You're familiar with Scripps Institute, I'm sure.
Yeah.
She's leading an international effort to find a cure for Ebola. A cure, not a vaccine, a cure. NIH said we would have had a vaccine by now. This female scientist, I don't know why I'm saying female, except I got her name, Erica Sapphire, she wants to find a cure. And you know what she's doing to buy equipment to speed her work? She is doing the same thing we did to try to buy some equipment for this honky-tonk little studio of ours. She's gone to crowdfunding. She's gone to crowdfunding to try to raise money to find a cure for Ebola. Now, this is not some, garage would-be scientist. She is professor in the Department of Immunology and Microbial Science at the La Jolla-based Scripps Research Institute. She's very credentialed, very educated, very much into this fight, and she has to go to goddamn crowdfunding. Can you believe that this is where we live now? This is the United States now. Crowdfunding. Not a government grant, not a grant from private enterprise, crowdfunding. Crowdfunding. And one of the reasons, this is what she said. We all want a cure for Ebola, but the free market is not going to support it because it begins by infecting people who are very poor. That's the United States today. The pharmaceutical companies, the bastards that run our government, they don't care. That's right, absolutely. They're just a bunch of poor Africans someplace, God knows where, in these, what are the names of the countries? Guinea? What the hell kind of a name of a country is that, right? We all want a cure, but the free market, that is capitalism, is not going to support it because Ebola begins by infecting people who are very poor. That's where you and I live, right in the heart of that.
So, what do you think of that? I think he tells it like it is.
Yeah, it is.
I'm telling you, I'm not pulling any punches. What do you think, Stan?
I worked at Baxter Laboratories, so I know what it's all about.
Is it right, what he said?
Yeah, partly.
Okay, now, I want to show you this other woman now. And why do we have these problems? Because we're playing politics, is essentially what we are doing, okay? Now, I want to make sure I have the right one. I'll show you her picture.
Ebola's are?
There, okay. Now, I want to show you next Amy Goodman. I don't know if you know of her. She's really a genius woman. She's a brilliant newscaster. She's a journalist, and she won the Right Livelihood Award, which is something like a Nobel for environmental and safe. And they do good work, okay? It's similar to the Nobel Prize. You win less money, but it's very prestigious. And she wrote a number of books, okay? Now, she is going to explain why we don't have a Surgeon General, okay? Now, the Surgeon General is the chief doctor, just like the Attorney General for the legal system. Surgeon General is the chief doctor of the United States. Why don't we have one? Again, they're playing politics, okay? And she explains it very well. This lasts for about 5 minutes. And I want to play this too, because these people say it better than I can. You all heard of what the Surgeon General? A guy named Murphy Vivek. They don't want him, and you'll see why. Again, it's politics, total stupidity, and I'll explain more detail. I'll tell you, I'm a hellraiser. I just tell it the way it is. Well, the way I think it is anyway. Listen to this.
We need a Surgeon General. I'm Amy Goodman, host of Democracy Now! With my weekly Breaking the Sound Barrier podcast. The United States now has an Ebola czar, but what about a Surgeon General? The gun lobby has successfully shot down his nomination, at least so far. The Ebola epidemic is a global health crisis that demands a concerted global response. Here in the United States, action has been disjointed, seemingly driven by fear rather than science. One clear reason for this, the nomination of President Barack Obama's choice to fill the public health position of Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, is languishing in the Senate. You'd think that an Ebola epidemic would move people to transcend partisan politics. But Vivek Murthy, despite his impressive medical credentials, made one crucial mistake before being nominated. He said that guns are a public health problem. That provoked the National Rifle Association to oppose him, which is all it takes to stop progress in the U.S. Senate. Dr. Murphy's statement on guns came in the form of a tweet. He tweeted, "Tired of politicians playing politics with guns, putting lives at risk because they're scared of NRA? Guns are a healthcare issue," he wrote in October of 2012. A year later, the White House announced his appointment to the position of Surgeon General, and on February 4th, 2014, he testified before the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, or HELP. He received bipartisan support in committee, but his nomination has not yet come up for a vote in the full Senate, ostensibly because Senator Harry Reid knows the vote would fail. Nominations only need a majority of 51 votes to win approval. Since the Democrats have a 55 to 45 majority in the Senate, at least for now, Murphy's approval as Surgeon General should have been routine. Fear of the NRA's perceived power, however, prompted several Democrats, those with tight re-election races in 2014, to indicate they would not vote to support Murphy. Among those expected to vote against him were Mary Landrieu of Louisiana, Mark Pryor of Arkansas, and Mark Begich of Alaska. These incumbent Democrats and others didn't want to provoke the NRA before the midterm elections, so the U.S. has no Surgeon General. What exactly does the Surgeon General do? The position dates back to 1798, when Congress established the country's first publicly financed health service to care for ailing merchant sailors. Now the Surgeon General commands more than 6,500 healthcare workers in the Commissioned Corps who are tasked with protecting U.S. public health. An equally important role of the Surgeon General is to be the nation's doctor, to use the position for public advocacy, to educate and inspire people to take healthcare seriously. So while there's an acting Surgeon General, Boris Lishniak, who is keeping the lights on at the organization, he hasn't assumed the public role that the position demands. In 1964, then Surgeon General Luther Terry released a groundbreaking report, Smoking and Health, which prompted significant shifts in tobacco policies, like the printing of warning labels on cigarette packs and the banning of tobacco ads on TV and radio. In the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan's Surgeon General, C. Everett Koop, advocated for education and action to combat HIV/AIDS against the wishes of Reagan, who didn't even utter the phrase AIDS for the first 6 years of his administration as thousands died of the disease. We can only assume that, were Dr. Murphy confirmed as Surgeon General, he would be a leading voice of reason in the national response to the Ebola epidemic. Instead, we get ill-informed talking heads demanding a travel ban to and from West African nations, which every public health official acknowledges would exacerbate the epidemic, ultimately driving more infected people to cross borders illegally, avoiding the checkpoints where they might be directed to care. This scenario would definitely result in more cases of Ebola in the United States. And what if the Surgeon General also stumped for common sense, data-driven policies to reform our gun laws? The Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence, named after President Reagan's press secretary, the late James Brady, who was critically wounded during an assassination attempt on Reagan, points out the scale of the problem with guns. On average, 128 Americans are killed or wounded by guns every day. More than 30,000 die from gun violence every year. As far as we know, there are only 2 people in the United States currently with Ebola. There are 300 million guns. Ebola can be stopped with proper public health procedures and by rapidly deploying a massive influx of public health workers, equipment, and other resources to Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea. The Senate should immediately vote to approve the nomination of Dr. Vivek Murthy as Surgeon General. I'm Amy Goodman with Dennis Moynihan.
Dee, what do you think? Neat. That's why I wanted to play it. Look. Huh?
She's absolutely right.
Yeah, we're playing politics. You see, these people don't care. Now, I am almost finished, so I got some more stuff here. Now, let me show you what we got here. Okay. How do we prevent future outbreaks? And the first, ask your question. What? Ask yourself this question, and the solution is in the answer. Progress. And the answer is, you all know. You all know? It's right here. Congress. Nothing's getting done, as we have just seen. Is this right? See? Here we go. A lovely congressman. Now, look what I just found today in the paper. I'm not in the paper, on the internet. I don't read the papers anymore because it's a waste of paper. I just can't bear having all this. Let's take a look. Here, is it any wonder why they have an approval rating lower than Ebola, anthrax, and smallpox combined? Okay? And I will tell you. What did they do today? Did you read? No. What is their first thing on the agenda? Something that's actually going to help the spread of Ebola. And I'll explain why. Here's the headline. Keystone Pipeline approval bills advance in Congress. Okay, this was the headline that I took today. Now, the Keystone Pipeline is a pipeline where they want to take tar sands from Canada and bring them down to Texas. Okay? And so they're saying, well, look at all the jobs it's going to bring. But, first of all, let's ask ourselves what's going on here. What kind of jobs? Well, first of all, they're going to do construction. All right, nothing wrong with constructing, but what are they building and why? They're building a pipeline to deliver that black, gooey, smelly stuff, which the only way it's going to be used is to burn it. And that's why that burns me up, okay? When you burn oil, what do you get? CO2. What's the biggest issue we have now on the planet? Global warming and climate change. And it just so happens that I wrote 2 books, one specifically on climate change. Many of you know this has the very optimistic title of Prognosis Disaster, the Environment, Climate Change, Human Influences, Vectors, Disease, and the Possible End of Humanity. So we have a special sale today, by the way, 2 for the price of 2. Just thought I'd mention it. Now, so anyway, so this is why I'm angry. And you see, nothing's going to get done. Now, this may help spread Ebola for the following reason. I did a lot of research for my book. First of all, if it gets warmer, you're going to have more insects and more other organisms roaming around, living longer. Now, bats might be in specific areas, but if it gets warmer, they might move to different areas that normally don't have as many. You understand? And therefore, it's a possibility. Now, I'm not saying this 100% sure, but the bats might be able to carry the virus even farther. You see? And what is the sole purpose of this pipeline? Well, first of all, it's a political issue. It doesn't make any sense. The only reason, what do you do with oil? You're not just going to let it sit around. You're going to burn it. Produce more CO2, more climate change. We know humans are producing it, yet we still have these deniers, okay? In fact, there's an organization, I think, called the Flat Earth Society. You know, there's some people that, I believe they think the Earth is flat because they can't see more than past there than a few feet away. So this is why we're not going to get anywhere. You understand? And I really believe this. And this is why I tell it the way it is. As far as I'm concerned, there's only 2 members of all 535 bodies worth anything. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah, go ahead.
These are the ones with guts. The rest don't. Yeah. So, anyway, that's my opinion. I just want to finish with this. Now, these are questions that people might ask, so I'll just answer them anyway. Can we get Ebola here? Yes, but it's unlikely. And we have seen some patients, you know, they might come from Africa, they might be infected, but now the airport is taking extraordinary cautions. They have this new thermometer, have you seen it? Where you don't even have to touch the person. In fact, the nurse has it over in the Skokie campus. You just look at, you don't even touch, you go, you scan the forehead. They might have it here. You just scan it, you don't even have to touch the person. And that's how they do it. They have, you know, new technology, let's make use of it. So at the airport, they're scanning people who come back from West Africa. All right, can we prevent it? Yeah, what can we do to prevent it? Well, like I say, we have to take precautions, but on the other hand, we shouldn't be too fanatic about it. One thing we must do is rush to develop drugs for it. See, we had the drugs years ago, but they were just sitting around on the shelf, ready for testing because, you know, pharmaceuticals just care about the money. What the government has spent over $2 trillion killing in Iraq and Afghanistan for nothing. By the way, I just heard today they spent $300,000 a day, an hour, whatever it is, to get rid of ISIS. It was written in the news today, I forgot. It was 300,000, was it per minute? I forget, something like that. Some outrageous amount. You see, all this money could be used to help save us. Instead of making enemies so we can go shoot them, let's you know, clean up the world. I think we make enemies. That's just my opinion. Now, I just showed you what is the treatment for Ebola. You know, it's mainly hydration, give them a lot of liquids and keep them isolated. And I guess the doctors know better than I do, but these, you know, just like the treatment, you know, I try to treat any infections that occur. And I just want to point out this guy Brantley, he was the first one. You know, I think he had red hair or red beard. He looks great now. He's walking the streets. He had Ebola. He acts as if nothing ever happened to him. So it can be done if we do things right. So now, other than that, I have nothing else to say. So if you have any questions, comments, complaints, go ahead. Yes?
Okay. We are in total agreement with you. We discuss a lot of this at home. With the question is, with the new political regime that's coming
Right.
in, the Republicans, and they're all for big business.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, how is this going to help our cause? I only see it as a preventive.
Wait till a catastrophe occurs. That's the only way.
Yeah, wait for catastrophe.
And you got to have people talk to these people. Like I'm trying to make an appointment with Jan Schakowsky to see her personally. I don't know if I can ever do it. I once met with, I made an appointment a few years ago, but I just spoke to one of her workers. That's one of the things we must do. Maybe we go as a group, talk to her and said, look, you know, you guys are not paying attention. We have to do something. And maybe we can start. Since she's our representative, let her do something. That's what I say.
So start with your local representatives.
That's what I say. But we gotta keep at it. We can't just say, okay, next time. You know, there's an old saying, persistence pays. Remember, I love the saying, a winner never quits and a quitter never wins. And that's what I've been doing for years. And I've got, you know, pretty far, I guess, with what I was doing.
The other question is, there is the push to send healthcare workers
Right.
further into the countries that need our help.
Right.
And yet, if you listen on the radio or TV, there are political speakers who are saying, U.S. isn't doing anything. We need to have those restrictions from people going on air, you know,
Right.
the air flights over there. So there's a contradiction. They need the help, but we're restricting the healthcare workers from going over there,
Yeah.
or, you know, it's like butting your head
Yeah, I know.
against the
Well,
wall.
yeah, I don't know how to answer that. I don't know why we would restrict them, because we're afraid when they come back they might be infected.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So, you know, we have to help. I think those who want to go should volunteer and just give them all the equipment they need. The total uniforms, make sure 100% sealed, and we have the equipment. We just have to get over there. To find the money now should be easier. You know, if Congress quit diddling around with this pipeline and all these other non-issues and end wars all over the world, they should close down their military bases. I think we have a few hundred all over the world. What do we need them for? They just soak up money. They don't do anything. I think it makes more enemies. That's just my opinion.
So again, start with your local representatives, voicing your opinion and...
Yeah, I'm going to try to make an appointment with her. Actually, one of my students works with her in her office. So he told me to email the assistant, and I will do that this week.
No, what? I'll let somebody else ask.
Yeah, anyone else? Oh, then keep going.
Okay, the symptoms that you posted
Yeah.
are very clearly some of the symptoms for flu viruses.
Exactly.
And we're in the flu symptom, in the
the
flu
flu era,
season
right.
now. So they're very, very close, and it's hard to distinguish until, like you said, there's a catastrophic.
Well, what happens is, if somebody is coming down with it and where they've been, in other words, if they've been to Africa and then they come with the symptoms, then you should worry. But you know, the flu has been around. You know, that's a good question. You ask somebody, have you been to Africa lately? And if he says yes, then that should ring an alarm, make a red flag. In most cases here, I doubt we'll see that, but it's possible. It's very possible. By the way, I was in Italy. I got back last month. I had to go to Italy for something for 5 days, and I was in Pisa. And just before boarding the plane, we would see a sign written in English and Italian. These are the symptoms of Ebola. If you've had it, let us know now. You know. And I wonder if anybody's going to do that. You know, if they even go, they do. But at least they put the sign up, so it's been there in the Pisa airport. It's probably in all the airports. It was a small sign too. It wasn't even big. So, you know, like I said, it was written in English and Italian. Yeah.
Yeah, a few years ago, we were returning from Europe, by a trip to Northern Europe, and when we got back to the States, they asked us a question of, had we been to any farming areas? This was 4 years ago. And my cousin had a little farm, had a couple of cows, and I said, yeah. So, you know, what shoes were you wearing around there? And I said, well, we gotta have them. So they took my shoes, and
Did they give you
because
some?
because they, I think they didn't have that cow problem at the time,
Oh,
about
yeah.
4 years ago.
Wow. Did they give you something else to wear?
Well, I had some other shoes in the bag.
Oh.
Yeah, well, they, the guy before me, they gave us one of those,
Slippers?
cotton, you know, slippers and,
Oh,
yeah.
interesting. I
They
never heard
walk
that.
out of there.
There's
I
a
know,
disease called rinderpest disease. I forget what it's called.
Hmm.
Anyway, yeah, so, anything else? I'm glad you came, by the way.
We are too,
Yeah.
thank you.
One comment with the Ebola, the
Yeah.
patients that do have Ebola are very sick. So you'll know it right off the bat versus other type of viruses like smallpox. Smallpox, you can be a carrier
Not know.
and you know, walk. you know.
But is that from the first day, or, you know, is it more in,
According to CDC, that you're not infectious until you're symptomatic. I sort of disagree with that, but that's what CD says, and they're smarter than I am. So, you know, we have to, as healthcare professionals, that's what we go by.
Now, you said you worked for Baxter?
I used to.
Oh, you
Morning
said-
Grove. I did research in antihypertensive drugs, so I know some of the
Yeah.
processes involved. I was in the fire service, and that's why I'm here, in case anybody's got questions in terms of...
Yes, Stan, he's full-time here. His office is in the Skokie campus.
Oh.
So in terms of how healthcare providers are preparing themselves, or like, my main responsibility was, I was in charge of all the hazmat teams in Illinois, so I'm still consulting with them, developing protocol and handling these type patients.
Are you working with the Rush University that is now setting up an Ebola?
The CDC has come up with guidelines with different types of infectious diseases, and Ebola is considered a type 4, so it's the highest level of protection. And that's more for airborne pathogens. Really, Ebola is not. I think the issues that some of the nurses and other doctors come down with the disease is what we call part of the taking off your personal protective equipment. It's called donning and doffing. Donning is putting it on, doffing is taking